Good morning, everybody. Thanks for making it to this online panel as part of the ICRRA conference 2025. I'll do a brief introduction and greeting from my side. My name is Friederike Landau-Donnelly. My pronouns are she, they. I also go by Fred. I'm a fairly recent member of the ICRRA network, which I'll say a few words about. But for today, the context is that we are hosting the third panel called Artistic Activists Organizing Against Right-Wing Authoritarianisms with 4 wonderful speakers. I'm really excited to digitally meet 2 of them, 2 of them I've collaborated with and had the pleasure to meet in real life already. So I'm hoping that this is the start of a conversation amongst artists and researchers. Very importantly, we're trying to bring a diverse set of perspectives to this conference. So this year's conference topic is conflicted culture, resilience and cooperation to strive in changing world orders. And it's taking place as a pre-event to the UNESCO Mondiakult conference, which is happening next week, which deals with cultural policies and sustainable development. This is the third of 4 panels. We listened to a keynote and 2 panels yesterday already, and feel free to join us this afternoon for the 4th and final panel. My name is Friederike Landau-Donnelly. I'm a cultural geographer, urban sociologist, and political theorist. I currently am a visiting professor at the Humboldt University in Berlin, which is also where I'm speaking to you from. It says on the slide that I'm affiliated with the TU Dortmund, which is my previous affiliation. I am a researcher. I'm interested in artistic activism. I'm interested in how artists are political agents, how they gather, how they collectivize, how they mobilize politically, how they speak as political agents, but obviously also how they speak as art makers. So today I'm really looking forward to introducing and letting 2 fantastic artists speak, but also 2 researchers who work on art in public space, art in contested territories, art in increasingly fascist/authoritarian times. But before we get to the 4 inputs, which unfortunately will limit to 10 minutes each, more or less, and then kind of like segue over into a collective debate, I just want to mention what the ICRRA network is. So the ICRRA network is a network that brings together global research and insights on the theory and practice of international cultural relations. So we're people from all over the place, mixed between academics and cultural mediators, cultural organizers, managers, people who work in international cultural organizations and stuff like that. And it's an interesting platform of knowledge exchange, coming together to organize things like this. And maybe just to elaborate very briefly on this year's topic or theme of conflicted culture, we as the ICRRA network acknowledge that we live in a time that is marked by an increase of violent conflicts and wars, as well as competing narratives and resurgent nationalisms. I think we're trying to gather voices about more inclusive, representative, and maybe also just ways to come together in these difficult times. And we're trying to be aware of historical challenges and problems, knowledges that have been excluded, so that through conferences like this, we engage with unlearning, relearning, and learning more solidarity-oriented ways of being together in the cultural field. I think we should maybe leave it at that. I'm looking forward to the debate because, like I said, I have met 2 of you in person, and the 2 are digital acquaintances, friends, collaborators. So without further ado, I'd very briefly like to introduce the 4 speakers, but also leave them some space to introduce themselves. Maybe we can leave this slide up for a minute. That's quite helpful. First up, we'll have Voica, who is speaking to us from Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Her research is talking about public art, the geopolitical context of public art in Romania. She works in the sociology department, I believe, and art history faculty of the Babis Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca. Next up, then we'll have Yishai Garbash, who's an interdisciplinary artist based in Berlin, with a practice of dealing with memory, with trauma, with protest. Then we'll have a tiny break after the two first inputs, just to see if there's some pressing questions, but maybe we can also channel them towards the debate. But just before we continue to hear Hexe and Jason talk, we'll have a tiny breather. So Jason Hexe Faye is also an artist, speaking to us very kindly from late night Seattle, I believe. So speaking about the practice of engaging with alternative knowledges, alternative spaces, alternative universes, maybe. But I think Hexe will explain their work, in a way from their own perspective. And last up, we have Dr. Jason Luger, who is a cultural geographer, speaking to us from the UK. His work centers around the rise of right-wing authoritarianism, and he's researched widely and published widely about art in public space, art in digital spaces, and art in so-called authoritarian regimes. I'm acknowledging that I can do only so good of a job to introduce you. Please feel free if I've forgotten something, to keep presenting yourself. But without further ado now, let's hand over the mic to Wojka. I'm super excited to have you as part of this round. So I'll mute myself, keep an eye on the chat, and keep track of time for roughly 10 minutes, but I will not cut you off impolitely, Wojka. So floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm super excited to the conversation, but I would just like to read through my own research and my very short presentation. So like Fred said, I am a researcher, but I'm also a teacher, and I split my time at the Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj between teaching very canonical, modern and contemporary art history classes to my bachelor students, and then I do my research, which is not canonical at all and very focused on a holistic view on art in public space, so from commission to unsanctioned, everything in between. This presentation was so much on the unsanctioned ones, but I just want to give a little bit of an introduction of the Romania phenomenon, which is less homogeneous, ethnically speaking, than one might expect. There's still a big difference between the historic provinces of Romania. Transylvania, as the former part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, still has a big Hungarian population, and there are still, in 2025, a little bit of an ethnic tension between the ethnic Romanians and the ethnic Hungarians. Now there's not so much Germans anymore. Following the communism, there was a big exodus, not that many Jews anymore. However, ethnically speaking, again, there is a rather big Roma population, which is largely unacknowledged. The percentages go from 3 to 9%. So you can see there's a big slider over there because they are not well recognized or well documented, and they don't declare themselves as Roma. So sociologically speaking, it's still a big unknown. However, something to say good about Romania, well, at least tidbit, it has the smallest gender pay gap out of the entire European Union, which is a positive remnant of the communist regime. But as we will see further down the presentation, this is not that reflected in the society, in representation of any sort. It's there, and I want to acknowledge it to begin with. In the 30 years or so after the fall of the communist regime, tensions have accumulated, and there was a resurgence of nationalism. Quite soon, we went through very scary elections last autumn. The elections were even thrown out at one point, which was unprecedented for the European Union and for Romania as well. There is a rising tide of Romanian traditionalism, even between my young students. So it's really all over the place. And I want to look at how art and art policies reflects this very murky, very scary situation overall, and also look a bit at the ethnic tensions, again, that were buried times because everybody was supposed to be, equal and very, very homogenous, and see what comes up in the last 30 years. I'm hoping you can see as I change my slides. This is the latest ever unveiling of a statue in Cluj-Napoca, which is of former American President Woodrow Wilson. And you might think, why on earth in December 2024, we have a statue of Woodrow Wilson in the city center of Cluj-Napoca in a very awkward, very non-committal position? Well, it's because we love Romanian nationalism, and he was one of the most well-spoken actors committing post First World world into national got to be part of Romania because of his 14-point speech. So in 2024, we love Romanian nationalism and we love America even more, which is reflected in these kind of gestures. In the entirety of Cluj-Napoca, which is very intellectual city, very cosmopolitan city, very diverse city, there is not a single statue to a historical women figure. This was not always the case. There was one of Empress Sisi unveiled shortly after her demise, part of, again, a homogenization process. The Austro-Hungarian provinces, she got a bust by the same author in many, many places. This was standing in Cluj until the communist regime took it off, because obviously she was Austro-Hungarian empress. It didn't look well. The pedestal still stands, as you can see in the middle picture. It's now a good place for graffiti writing, and the bust is still in existence, but it is placed in a very anonymous spot in the art museum, but it sits outside anyway. I don't even think it has a label or anything. This shifts the conversation to how the priorities of post-communist Romania was in commemoralizing issues. Obviously, there are memorials to the revolution of '89, but they are, honest to God, the ugliest interventions of art in public space one can imagine, both in Cluj, in Bucharest, also in Timișoara, everywhere that people died. They just built this abstract, people don't know what they have no guidance to the memory of the place or to the site specificity, and yeah, they are very, very forgettable. Coming back to women, again, only recently in 2023 in Bucharest, there was a monument to the anti-communist resistance. Monica Lovinescu was one of the key actors. She was a speaker for Radio Free Europe. Some of you who studied the communist period might know that. But as always, she is represented alongside her husband. So it's her memorial, but he's there as a prominent figure as well, although he was not as well known in their lifetimes. Circling back to the Roma population, there is no monument whatsoever commemorating any Roma person, not even as a group, aside from the one official Holocaust memorial in Bucharest, which is a conglomerate of different bits and pieces, as you can see in the picture. They have a separate monument, as you can see at the back side of the whole memorial space. It's a circle, a wheel, just evoking the Indian heritage, as you can see in the label. But again, very non-committal, very non-invasive. On the other Holocaust memorials, there is no mention whatsoever of the Roma deportation. Throughout Romania, there are several, there's many of them, mostly on the routes that the trains took that deported, but again, no mention of the Roma. And just to end things on a very negative example, In 2014, students from the Art University of Cluj-Napoca were invited by mayor of Baia Mare. Baia Mare is a city in northern Romania, to paint a wall that blocked the quote-unquote normal Romanian population's view to the project housings of the Roma population. It was not an enclosement, but just the wall, you can sense the irony. And they painted it, the students painted it on the side facing the city, not facing the Roma playgrounds or children. Obviously, there were many legal issues, many legal cases against this. But as you can see from the Google Street View, in 2020, and as I speak in 2025, the wall still stands, the paintings still stand. Things have and have not been redone. It depends. There's 5 of them, two of them have been redone, but not substantially. The Roma population still lives there. There is, in Europe, there's a trend against social separation in housing. Romania does not follow that trend at all. And I just want to end things by, again, just pointing out that the students and the university really actually signed that piece of work. They were doing it very proudly as they were putting it up. And facing the backlash, they have just painted over this wall with their signatures. But I will forever, every time I'm presenting on the subject, show it to anyone that's interested, even remotely, just to underline how much lack of social importance there is, even in Romanian universities, even among Romanian artists who don't study sociology. We don't study the history of Roma population. We don't study even proper history of Romania. And it just goes to show that at the high educational level, things are really, really bad. So that will and might as well explain the tendencies of nationalism and of, making Romania great again, as if it really ever was. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't go overboard a lot. I didn't check the time. I'm waiting for your questions. And I hope I made sense.
Thanks so much, Wojka. First of all, you absolutely made sense. You also stuck very well to the time. Thank you for offering us this sort of like overview, almost like kaleidoscope of different initiatives of art in public space in Romania, who monuments are dedicated to, who they aren't dedicated to any longer. I think the question of visibility and invisibility, but also the question of gendered commemoration ties over very nicely to the second panelist. Yishai, I'm really excited for you to share your presentation and some of your work. You have a very long-standing artistic practice. I will hand over the floor to you to show us some of your projects, and I'm looking forward to what we can all see from your recent work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to share my work and be here with so many amazing people, and continuing the theme of seeing what's there as well as seeing what's missing. And it seems like okay. And please let me know if you can see the slides. You can see the slides?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
So continuing with the theme of seeing what's there and what's missing. First project I'm going to talk about is Becoming. It's both presented as a flip book and as a zoetrope. Zoetrope is a very old film media that predates projection. And I chose that specific media. This is an example of a zoetrope. Right? You spin it and you would see animation. And I did that as a 3-meter large zoetrope in the Busan Biennale in 2010. And it is my body 1 year before, 1 year after gender affirming surgery. I was really tired of many things, among them the idea of before and after, because I'm the same person I always was. The error of incorrect gender, it was never on me. It's a social construct. And I was, also really rebelling against the presentation that my body is only good as a material for other artists. And yeah, and I created this zootrope. And I really wanted it to be real for the people watching. And that's why I chose to use non-projected media, because projected media is film, is projections, is something we know, and we know it as unreal. And I wanted a real sense of reality, the same experience where you see a print, but in a moving image. And that was Becoming. And as a flip book, so it's accessible for different population. Next project I'm going to touch about, I'm going to tie all of this together at the end, I hope, is In My Mother's Footsteps. In this project, which is an 11-year project, I followed my mother's footsteps through the Holocaust. She was born in Berlin, Germany, 2 streets away from where I live. And this is where she was born. And when Hitler came, the family escaped to Groningen in Holland. And this is where is now where she escaped to. From there, she was deported to Westerbork. And this is the kitchen where my grandmother worked in Westerbork. And then to Theresienstadt. This is the Kaserne, the barracks where my mother and my grandmother and her sister stayed while in Theresienstadt. From Theresienstadt, they were deported to Auschwitz. This is the train track that they followed to Auschwitz. And this is the barracks where they were in Auschwitz. This is the last place my mother saw my grandfather. He was behind that line when they were sent to work in a different camp. This is the ground of one of the 6 places where my grandparents' ashes were scattered after they were killed in the gas chamber. This is the camp where Christianstadt, the camp where my mother and her sister were sent to work at. After, when the Allies were winning, they were sent to the Death March back into mainland Germany. And I followed the route that she took. In this project, I went and saw the places where my mother was and the way they are today. I held my mother's story as true, and also the reality of the places as true. And it's not about her, it's about my inheritance from her. And this is where they ended up in Bergen-Belsen. This is the barracks where she was with her sister in Bergen-Belsen. And this is the spot where they were liberated from Bergen-Belsen. And yeah. And in this project, and in the first project, I am working with my personal narrative. In later artworks, my practice has changed, and it's become bearing witness to the trauma of others, because my narrative is not separated from what I see from the world. If I don't work with my narrative, is what's inside me, all I see outside in the world is what I have not worked with within myself, because it's both within you and without you, and you have to polish the mirror within you in order to see outside. At least that's my understanding right now. And I ended up working around the world and bearing witness to trauma. And this is not as somebody who understands, but it's somebody who does not know, which is a very important point in intimacy. Severed connections. Do what I say or they will kill you. I started with where I was born in Israel, and I photographed the separation barrier from both sides. As an artist, landscape is a very traditional way of looking at things, and something I did not understand. I could use a very well-known artistic practice of landscape with large format photography and have no idea what's going on and learn from that, learn how to see. And I photographed from both sides, but that still did not really help me understand. So I went also to Korea. Well, this is the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. Technically, this is actually the water part, so it's the northern limit line. And I photographed it as well. And this started to help me. This is looking towards North Korea. This is in Pingyong Island, one of the islands there. This is in Belfast, the peace line, the separation between Catholics and Protestants. And this is something that happened. Most of these, the peace lines were created after the peace agreement. And I didn't really understand why the separation barrier was created till I started seeing more of them from around the world. And my understanding changed that they are about fear, about creating fear of the other in order to control your own population, which is what Netanyahu did, which is what Miss Park, who was the South Korean president beforehand, created, because fear of the other is such a great way of controlling your own people and making sure you don't see what those with power want you to not see. And again, it's about what is there and what is not there, and seeing what is there, but also knowing about what is not there. And this is one of the presentations of this. And it's not about having an idea of what I'm doing. It's about going to the places and actually seeing what's there and understanding at the same time what is not there. The way we look, we look forward to what we need to get, but we always have to look also backwards to leave no one behind. And there are no fast and hard rules here. Not that everything is relative and not that everything is absolute, but look forward to what you need to reach, but also look back to leaving no one behind. I'm trying to get a lot of things in a short time, so please let me know if something was not clear. I will be happy to clarify. And just to make this last point again, I hope I can share the sound. This is just a short audio clip. So let's see if it works. This is the sound of a han, which is a wooden mallet that you strike calling in a Zen monastery, calling for meditation. When I was training, I was Jikido, timekeeper, and it was my job to do this, to call for meditation. And I had a very hard time getting it right because I kept focusing on the sound. And what really helped me is one of my teachers told me to not focus on the sound, but remember that the sound is only a way of emphasizing the silence, and to focus on the silence, on the bit that is silent, and understanding that sound is just the brackets to hold it. And this is what I've been using a lot in my artistic practice. See what's there, but also see what is missing. Remember, sometimes what you see is just the brackets to hold what you don't see. And it's at the same time looking forward and looking back to leave no one behind. And we all would love, a set of rules to follow. However, in many ways, there is no set of rules to follow. Not that everything is permissible, but there's a certain balance, a certain way of doing. And this returns me to the I just had to include them incredible women that have to cut by hand the grass on the side of the road in the island in the northern limit line because they're poor and need to eat. And I just want to include them because we have to remember who we don't see, because everybody drives past them and they're not seen. This is again returning to the same thing of seeing what's there and seeing what's not there at the same time. And it returns me to my original question, which is, in the time we are today, in the place we are today in the world, where do you put your limits? Well, I said we have to look back and we have to look forward. What will you do? How much are you, what are your personal stakes involved here? And it's easy for me, as a Jewish woman, as a trans woman, as a woman who's working class, it's always hard. And I've looked people in the eye that wanted to kill me. But, where do you put the stakes? And,
Thank you,
sorry.
Yusha. I think you're making us really think hard about the lines between who gets to be visible, who has to stay invisible in these times where certain diversity or identity-oriented policies in the cultural sector and in the art world are becoming increasingly under threat. And I think it's super helpful to show that there are generations of subjects that are being talked about in art, or subjects that are making art are living under these difficult conditions. And I would love to come back to the notion of the fear of the other and the framing of who's in and out, and what gets funded and what doesn't get funded, what gets shown, what doesn't get shown later on in the conversation. So thank you very much for showing some of your projects across a long span of time. In order to keep more or less on schedule, I would love to just hand it over to Hexa now. Thank you very much for being with us as well. We all look forward to seeing some of your work, maybe hearing some of your reflections on the times we live in. Again, thanks for making time at this inhumane hour, more or less. Over to you. I'll keep time for roughly 10 minutes. Thanks so much for being here.
No, thank you. It is a little bit late over here. I'm on the west coast of what's currently called the United States in occupied Duwamish territory, also called Seattle. I'm happy to be here. I'm usually up at night, so this is actually not too late. But I'll do a little bit of talking about my work for a minute here. I'm Hexa Fei. I live in Seattle. I am a transgender indigenous artist. I do a lot of work with digital glitch art and digital art in general. And for me, the glitch is an interruption of an image or a sound or a video, and an expression of technology at its breaking point. Also, it is an appropriation when you take an image that was originally intended to portray one thing and change it, it becomes something else and it's interpreted completely different. And also, it is a huge question mark. And I like having questions in the work that I'm doing. I like that I'm not always completely in control of my results, because it forces me to give up ownership of everything, which I appreciate. I take my digital art into the physical world as well. Part of my process and personal philosophy as an artist and a human in the world is that we are not separate from nature, and the technology that we use to create art is not separate from nature, and our relationships with how we interact with nature and other humans and politics and technology are all interconnected. So these are a couple of originally photographs that were digitally modified and then transferred onto reclaimed wood. And part of my process with that is that all of the wood that I use has to be either a gift or something that I've found in the trash. I also create small video games. Most of them are interactive fiction. Many of them are specifically targeted towards other queer people and other trans people and other indigenous people in order to like communicate different aspects of our lives and our culture. Um, uh, I really enjoy narrative design as a tool where people get to interact with their own ability to choose, to like drive how they're interacting with different topics. I'm also in the process of making an educational game for um, the local aquarium, which I'm very excited about, and I can't talk too much about because it's not done yet. Um, uh, I work in performance and film sometimes. That the body is the proof that we are existing and we are alive. And also, when we choose to not perform gender, when we choose to remove ourselves from the frame, like that is also a statement. Let's see here. I tend to talk a little bit fast, so please tell me to slow down if you need me to. But also, if I end early, then there's more time for other people to talk, so that's fun.
You're doing
Digital
super great. You have more than half the time left.
Cool. Digital and Digiqueer was a curation project that I did 2 iterations of, and I'm hoping to do more in the future that showcased sacred gender and transgender indigenous media artists and transmedia artists, so people working in multiple modes of um, media art. And the most recent iteration had people from various different indigenous nations, mostly based in North and South America and also Hawaii, which was really interesting to see all of the different cultures in the gallery together. And the curation process and showcasing these works to me is very important because most of the time people forget that we exist. The Colonial Project has made it so that in order for the Colonial Project to happen in most of the world, uh, indigenous, queer, and trans people had to be removed. And the current colonial and like authoritarian project in the US is doing that with trans people in general right now, trying to like remove us from the narrative and from existence. So my work in curation for me proves that we exist and have complex stories and like complex artist practices. Um, this is a little bit about my non-artistic work. I work in harm reduction and community outreach, mostly focusing on sex workers, transgender community members, houseless people, drug users, extremely vulnerable populations. We go to where people are interacting in street life and living and give them food and water and access to basic medical care, that sort of thing. Sometimes we wear silly costumes. This picture is from a day when we all decided to dress up. Um, uh, I also work with the Washington State Department of Health. I am not directly employed with them. I'm on a advisory and strategy committee, which is both really fun and very frustrating. I love the ability to watch the strategy form within government level, about how we're controlling different infectious diseases and how funding works and all of that stuff. And the cons, of course, as anyone who has ever worked near a bureaucracy or a large organization, is that sometimes the closer you are to the power, the more obvious it is that the power does not care about you, and like in what ways it does not care about you or the people that you care about. Um, yeah, and moving on to my own life relationships with land and artistic practice. I'm always asking myself and asking people around me, where do our tools come from and how are we using and allocating our resources? Like everyone that I know uses computers to communicate, to write. Sometimes a lot of us, like media artists, use them almost exclusively to build the worlds or objects or stories that we're trying to tell. And the resource extraction that it requires to have all of our digital technology is complex and often extremely harmful to the land and to various people. So like, how are we, it's a question that I ask quite a lot. How are we interacting with our technology? What are our relationships with the technology that we are using? How might we subvert the hypercapitalism of technology? How might we like have complex reciprocal relationships with like the land and like also like the places that perhaps our like technology and our resources come from? And these also like are deeply connected to my indigenous roots. These like reciprocal relationships are like inherent and like a part of Lakota culture, which is where my people come from. So, and like resistance to authoritarianism, there's a lot to be said about what the US is doing right now. And I don't have time for all of that. And none of us really have time for that today. But like we are all, as creative workers, dreaming a new reality into the world. And oppressive regimes hate that creativity. They hate people being able to create new worlds within themselves and bring those into like the wider world. Um, and there's like a little note here about the long history of warrior cultures in my people. For me, being an artist is also a part of being a warrior. We are creating space for our own stories and the stories of others. The more creativity we bring into the world, the better we are at resisting control and oppression. And so, yeah, that's about all I have. So I can pass it on to whoever else wants to talk.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hexe, for sharing. I think you ended on a very noteworthy remark there that oppressive regimes hate creativity, and that maybe in the way that certain funding policies are, reducing understandings of diversity or inclusion, that they're just being cancelled and cut completely. I think that is illustrative of your point that authoritarian regimes are trying to construct the world again in a very simplified manner. Again, going back to also what Yisha said about the other and the majoritarian subject. So I think we'll have lots to talk about. Many thanks for sharing. I'll hand over the mic just briefly to Jason now for about 10 minutes to hear about his research across the globe, I would say. We are doing well on time, so let's see where we end after Jason's presentation, because I'm really, really looking forward to some shared debate. You can ask questions to the individual speakers or to us as a group, I would say. But before that, without further ado, over to you, Jason, to talk about art and public space with, against, and within the far-right authoritarianism. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Can everyone see my slides? Good. Thank you, Friederike, and others for this diversion on a Friday morning. It's much appreciated. And wow, I'm thinking about a lot from the previous presentations. I'm working on a paper on the glitch right now. So I loved seeing those ideas about glitch, and I'm still kind of figuring out what the glitch is and what it offers. And then Ishai, your prompt about punching a Nazi is also so personal right now. We have a hate march scheduled tomorrow here in Newcastle with Tommy Robinson. And I'm always kind of questioning my position as an anti-fascist scholar and how active I should be. So yeah, a really great discussion. So I don't think I'll take the full 10 minutes, which probably you're all very happy about, but yeah, my work is looking at urban space as a geographer and where art comes into that as resistance sometimes, but sometimes also as an appropriated space, and often where that happens at the same time. And so that's what frames my idea of art against the far right and authoritarianism, but also just operating within in an everyday sense and using different strategies to sort of to operate. And then perhaps a bit more troublingly, the way that the far right and authoritarianism actually deploy art and the way that art is becoming in some ways a far right space. So it's those kind of three avenues that I've come across in my own ramblings around cities and my own sort of case studies. I'm trying to move the slide forward. There we go. So my own work has taken me from Southeast Asia, where I looked at the notion of grassroots creativity in places like Singapore, very tightly controlled authoritarian environments. And I did some interviews with artists and activists and queer artists and activists. And I wanted to know how they operate within this system. So how do you produce critical art in a system with heavy, heavy censorship and with so many boundaries on expression and political expression? And from that, I got some ideas on resistance, the textures of resistance, and how resistance doesn't always look like what we might expect in the so-called West or the so-called Western liberal context. It's not always as simple as a protest sign or a visual aesthetic that is clearly against the state or against a power structure. It's often much more coded and much softer. And that's especially true operating within authoritarianism. And I think perhaps artists here would understand that sometimes it's a softer coded way to get messages across. And then something that I've been interested in more recently and kind of fascinated by the horrific spectacle of is how I see the contemporary far right using art and infiltrating the artscape and using some of the strategies and tactics that have maybe historically been the domain of more progressive groups and more radical groups for social justice. And I think that's something we need to track. It's a bit more uncomfortable, but I think it widens perhaps what we think of when we think of public art. It is also the domain of fascism and always has been, and that's the uncomfortable truth. So one of the things I looked at in Singapore was the creative use of urban space. So in this particular context, and this is the case in other authoritarian contexts, we might talk about Turkey, we might talk about Russia, we might talk about China. We might increasingly talk about the United Kingdom, where the use of public space is incredibly surveilled and policed. But this was a gathering called the Pink Dot, which is an annual LGBTQ rally that takes place in this park, which is called Speaker's Corner or Honglim Square. And basically it's a gathering that used to be a circle. That's why it was the pink dot, but it's grown over the years into a sort of less definable shape. People wear pink and they have pink signs, and there's an aerial photograph at the end of the day, and there's performances and speeches. But it's not allowed to be an openly pro-queer gathering because that would not be permitted in Singapore. So it's a kind of coded, it's a pink dot. It's a place for the queer community and allies to come together, but it can't be seen as advancing a queer agenda. So, and it takes place only in a prescribed space. It has to be pre-registered. Foreigners are not permitted to attend. It's not permitted for foreign companies, of which there are many in Singapore, like Visa and Amex, Google. They're not allowed to sponsor or really show up. So it's an example of this kind of strategic negotiation of space. So does this count as resistance? It is very sanitized, right? You know, what kind of agenda is this getting across? But you know, you ask a Singaporean, and this is quite radical for this context, and especially the way it's able to upscale through the digital and speak to the wider, the diasporic community. And I think it speaks to how queer communities use space creatively in very difficult settings. And so I've done some work looking at how artists operating in this context, or what we might call a closed context or a semi-closed context, maybe don't see themselves as resisting all the time. You know, they are pragmatic. They have the realities of having to win commissions. And in a place like Singapore, that involves working with the state. It's very difficult to be against the state if you want to work and you want to eat. And I talked to several artists who would kind of switch roles throughout the day. So maybe during the day they were giving artistic talks in primary schools, very much state, you know, following a script that was approved by the state in the education system. But maybe at night they were showing up to a more radical event at a black box theater somewhere, and kind of moonlighting as an activist, and then switching back in the morning. So the role of the artist was always changing. And I think that's important, that resistance is not always a linear process, and the becoming an activist is not necessarily linear. It does kind of reverse. It gets tangled in between. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. So out of this, I started to look at like resistance. What does it look like then? And yeah, I don't really have the answer other than it's incredibly maybe contextual and contingent and temporal, that resistance is completely a matter of interpretation by user. So I've been fascinated with the way projections are being used right now as a kind of medium for resistance. This was the projection on Windsor Castle recently with Donald Trump visiting for a state visit. Someone projected Trump and Epstein on the facade of the castle, which I thought was brilliant. I've also done some work with street art in places like Dresden, which is on the left, where I found that anti-fascist street art as resistance shared space sometimes with fascist street art, sometimes layered over each other. So it's a kind of constant negotiation of representation and visibility in urban space. It's a dialogue, and I think projections are part of that. It's something layered on top of something else. So resistance is not a set process, right? It's an ongoing process, and it's a conversation, and it's unsettled. It's never quite determined. And this was the basis for my edited volume in way back in 2018, I think it was, or 2017, with some case studies of what these negotiations look like in different contexts around the world. Another projection which caught my attention was in China a couple of weeks ago. This was a Chinese dissident who had actually left China, but was able to remotely operate a projection of anti-government language on the facade of this building. And I can't read Mandarin, sadly, but it is sort of anti-state language. Maybe someone here can read the Mandarin. And this dissident from the UK was able to remotely operate cameras as well, which then caught the state barging into the apartment. And so the camera was kind of turned back on the state. And so it was a really creative use of sort of the state's own mechanisms for resistance. But this is a very Chinese story, right? So this may not look like resistance in a place like the UK. And then finally, I've been fascinated by how art is also the domain of the far right. And this is not a new thing, right? We can go back to Nazism and the way that art and spectacle and aesthetics were so important to the fascist directive in Italy and in Germany. Look at the rallies of Adolf Hitler. Look at Leni Riefenstahl in the film. You know, art and aesthetics were central to that, to gaining legitimacy for fascism. But that's happening now in really interesting, fast, and often digital ways. So I've looked at how murals are used in places like hardcore gyms to depict kind of warriors and Christian nationalist themes, a very military aesthetic. And I've been weirdly and very disturbingly fascinated by the rapid drawing of like Donald Trump as Jesus. I wrote about these new trends in this paper with Martin Sabraki about how the far right has been very canny at infiltrating these places of art, using digital mediums, using humor, for example, using memes really, really well, using AI as art. And often these involve more than human processes, which is very troubling. And we have some research that the coding processes themselves are embedded with sort of far-right motifs. And that's what Sophia Noble wrote about in Algorithms of Oppression, that the images coming out of AI tend to reinforce kind of Christian nationalist and patriarchal and hegemonic bodily themes. There's a rapid drawer or rapid painter named Vanessa Horabuena who has been showing up at Turning Point USA events. Turning Point USA was the organization, or is the organization formerly run by Charlie Kirk. I'm not sure who's running it now, but she would show up and on this giant stage, she would paint Trump or Jesus or even Charlie Kirk, believe it or not. So I believe she deserves to be considered an artist, as much as we may not like that and everything that that represents. Okay, so just wrapping up. Oops. Yeah, I think the far right today relies on art. It relies on the spectacle of public art and using public space for legitimacy. And we're a bit blind if we don't also appreciate that. And it's very good at using the digital. And again, that opens up questions of positionality for us as artists or as critical researchers of how we're going to approach that. And perhaps widening the space of art to include that very uncomfortable possibility. Resistance is complicated, right? We all deal with those complications, whether we are in the academy and we have to deal with the realities of institutional structures, or working artists have to deal with what it actually means to get a commission from a government entity. It is a constant game, kind of strategies and tactics, and resisting is never settled. And then finally, Harriet Hawkins, the cultural geographer, opened up what public art is in her 2013 intervention, suggesting maybe art deserves an expanded field. So I think maybe we can even think more recently, maybe we continue to expand public art. What do we mean? What gets included in public art and in public space, and who decides? And what kind of politics are involved in those decisions? And maybe expanding the field can help us with these discussions. So that was a whirlwind tour of some random thoughts, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for taking us even further globally. I think we've touched on a lot of spaces, a lot of places, a lot of mentalities, times of art, both in the public space, but also in institutionalized spaces like biennials, for example, with Yesha's work, or in the digital, like Hexa's work. I am now going to open the floor in both the spoken and the written sense. We can have a look at questions that are popping up in the chat. So far, I can see two things. I have a million questions. Let's see if we could get to that, or if we need to defer that to another point in time. So first off, I would like to draw direction to Katharina Ritter's question, who's asking about the German context. I don't know how much you can speak to that, or maybe list some dreams, as Hexa put it, forward. So Katharina's question is, what would be your wishes or tips for German institutions of contemporary art, apart from the obvious contexts such as diverse programming? I don't know if one of you would like to take that. And just to complete the question, reading out, Katharina is also wondering, how do you create capacity, resources, and time for yourselves and your work in these times of such pluralistic pressure? How do you manage to not lose your energy? I think that's a very complex question, not only speaking about the personal capacity and resources, but maybe also the available resources, such as, do you get your work funded? Do you receive scholarships? Do you get to go on residencies? Or in what ways do you have to strategically wrestle with making the kind of work that you want to do? I see Yesha's hand up, so maybe we can first have you respond to this question, and then we'll see if we can steer it to somebody else. Thank you, Yesha.
I wanted to even make the question stronger. I mean, artists should be the most dangerous people in the room. The fact that art is not dangerous anymore is troubling. And why is art not as dangerous as it used to be? Because artists used to be kicked out of countries or jailed so much more. Because ideas, ideas can be amazing. But how do we do it from a German context? Value lived experience as much as you value formal credentials. Art that is questioning, art that has no idea, is very interesting, because for me as an artist, if I know something, there is no interest in going deeper. If I have no idea how to even start it, then it's something I can work with. When you have an idea, it's already dead. There is nothing more to gain. And this is the fight against the far right, is, art that is already answers, art that tells you something. That's a very kind of far right field, because, it's already solid, it's fully in control. Art that is, not in control, like Hex said, not in control, is a question, is evolving, is a relationship that can, come up into something. And this also ties into capitalism. It's, for many people, much easier to see the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Most artists I know, before breakfast, can come up with 5 alternatives, and if you feed us, we can come up with more. The question is changing how you view the game, the battlefield. I think battlefield is more accurate. So if you look at the UK, the last 10 years, trans people were used as a way of creating a binary. Trans people versus women's right. That's such a problematic overtone window shift, because the question is body autonomy versus not. Abortion, financial independence, queerness, transness. Trans is also, again, a binary problem, because it's really a Western people's word to tell other Western people that cis, there's more than just cis people. But again, it's kind of this fixed idea of a binary, of right and wrong, of having full control over something. And we are here as artists embodying, as trans people, actually every second we are alive is a resistance, because people want us dead, want us gone, want us erased. That's also Jewish. So I am hoping I'm making myself clear. It's something I tried to do in my, and I think failed in my presentation, but it's, going beyond the binary, going beyond the fixed idea, going beyond, feeling right, being an ally. There is no ally, there's action, doing, creating, and actually, feeding people, making sure everybody has food. That is a radical idea. I hope this is, I'm trying to do a lot with very little. Is this clear? Or am I, need more words?
I think you're making the point clear that thinking beyond the binary relates to bodies, it relates to categories of, funding, it relates to, what is art and what isn't art, what's worthy of funding, what isn't, and stuff like that. So I think the thinking beyond the binary touches on a lot of things that are,
and not hopeless. Hope, I feel, is more like a drug, not hopeless, because it's overwhelming. There's too much coming in. It's not hopeless, it's dangerous. That's where we are. The ideas we have no idea we have already can be dangerous if we do it right. It's about the doing.
Yeah, and also, going beyond binaries is maybe difficult in a system that tries to reconstruct a normal versus an abnormal, or a right versus a wrong, and stuff like that. I'm trying to bridge over to Avril Joffe's question about the threshold, or maybe the difficulty to find what is art or propaganda. Avril is asking about positionality in response to the authoritarian spaces and times we live in, because obviously there is something in the dictate of what is supposed to be taking place, or what is supposed to be shown, what is allowed to count as art or not. And I think that is a question that connects all of you together. So maybe somebody could respond to these gradients of what is art, what is propaganda? Does it matter whether it comes from the so-called progressive left or the far right? Whoever wants to go first, I'm trying to look at people,
I could have maybe a very quick attempt. It's a tough one. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from Toni Morrison, who said that all good art is political. There's none that isn't. But she doesn't say what kind of politics. So I think art has to be political, but I worry about gatekeepers who determine what is valid and what is not. And I think that comes with the risk of marginalizations and reactions. And I think that some of the reaction that we're seeing now, from the attacks on arts funding to the attacks on arts infrastructures to the infiltration of arts organizations by the far right, by far right governments, I think part of that is because maybe of the way that the gatekeeping mechanisms have operated. So I suppose I'm an advocate for dialogue, even really uncomfortable dialogue, but others may have a very different approach.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe somebody else. Voika, were you going to speak up?
Yes, I was just going to say approximately the same thing. Just because we don't like it doesn't mean it's not art, I guess. And obviously, at some level, all art is political art, because we still live in a society, no matter what side we're on. So every gesture could be considered of its place and of its time and of its politics, even though sometimes it's more overt or not. So yes, all art is political. I'm reading in the chat again. At some level, I really do consider that. And I think even if you're outside, you're still making a choice. Even if you're ignorant, you're still making a choice, which is again political. So we don't get to pass it off that easily. And I was thinking about the question earlier about the German policies and how funding works. I just want to say I'm not a big, so I don't work in this area, but I know my generation and I know the people in my cohort in the education that I had, which was also art school. It also included art school. And of my classmates who are trans people, all of them live in Germany and work in Germany. I don't know if that's just a coincidence or not, but it's obviously much more difficult for them to work and get funding in Romania. I would say borderline impossible. Also because of the prejudices of their families. So it's again, distance type of thing. But yeah, Germany still seems to be a good place for them. I'm sure it's not easy. You're muted, Frederick.
I said I'm sure Yesha wants to give a brief response to that.
So I'm just putting this out there. It's just a very, very narrow personal experience on this topic.
I would disagree. I mean, particularly in the art world, trans women are completely erased in German art world. The Berlin Gay Museum, which is considered, good, doesn't show art by trans women, only about trans women. And yeah, but it's, returning to the bigger context here, the Senate, which controls a lot of funding, it used to be a Senate for Culture in Europe. Now it's the Department of Senate for Culture and Social Cohesion, and application. And I'm speaking as still a member, probably a former member very soon, of the Berlin Studio Committee. I'm a difficult woman, so yeah, I don't think I will be invited. I'm not invited next year, but you see, it's easier to fund something that has very, answer oriented. We have something rather than open, uncertain art. But uncertain art is a lot more interesting because you discover things you didn't know. And this is part of the control mechanism. And returning here to a question I see in the chat, I mean, it's an emotional stance, but it's about giving resources and making sure you see not just the loudest voices that you're used to seeing, but making sure you see the other voices as well, who is not allowed to speak. Bodies like mine are not in institutions, we're not members of institutions, we're not collected in art. So yeah. Sorry, I have a lot to say about the subject, but I will stop here unless there is a specific request.
I think maybe we can tie it into a general discussion about the politics of funding, right? To make decisions that are matter-of-factly exclusionary because they reproduce a certain type of artist subject and do not make space for the glitch or for the unforeseeable or for the non-outcome. I think it's kind of interesting that public art funding, so art funding from the public realm, so state art funding is what I mean, often has a very narrow, in that sense, binary conception of what to fund. And if we're saying all art is political, I wonder also if there isn't also art that is not political, but it still gets funded through the public realm. But it's very predictable, it's very uncontroversial, it's very neat, cute, clean, pleasing, and in that way
that is political. But that is political.
That is also political, yes.
No, also that is very political, and that shapes the conversation and changes the overtone window. It's exactly political, and it's so important to know that it's political because it changes the conversation, and that it has huge effect. It's not small. I think we have to understand the impact of that.
Yeah, so it's sort of like interrelated in that some art is trying to be expressive of its protesting nature or its critique of the state system, like the temporary projections that Jason showed, or occupations or interventions of other sorts. And at the same time, the state sanctioned, the allowed art speaks a different language. And I think those are the kind of like complications that we need to deal with. I'm trying to look at some more of the notes that I made. I was wondering if we could maybe go back to the point that Hex made about power doesn't care about you, because I'm interested in how both artists who apply for funding, but also researchers who apply for funding, people who try to write stories, people who try to create space about alternative visions of this broken planet, how they meander into the complex of power or not. So yes, one strategy is to shy away or to consciously stay away because you don't want to intervene with this power complex. But also, how do you try to wrestle your way in, or maybe nudge, or as like a parasite, strategically kind of like work within the confines of power? I think that's a question to all of you as well. How do you deal with power not caring about you?
That's a big question, my goodness. I mean, I feel like we all deal with it in various extremely personal ways, but also clearly through the work that we do and our art and whatnot. I also had a thought about earlier about like if art that is used by like fascist and oppressive regimes can be considered art. I would say yes, because historically every uh controlling or oppressive political regime has chosen what art is appropriate and promoted that art specifically, and then everyone else is left outside of it. So that's a whole other conversation about how culture is chosen and developed and curated by people who are in power. And then like if you are, like many of us, a type of person that is not necessarily wanted or a friend to people in power, like as like an indigenous trans person, the United States government has essentially wanted me dead before I was born. And that's just something that I grew up with. That's something that I deal with every day. Um, and the way that most of my friends and family and all of us deal with it is by being with each other and affirming that we're all alive and creating culture and space for our lives and other people's lives to flourish, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this these like responses and organizations in a way, or self-organizations, also speak to the very broad I think question of the ICRRA network as a network that looks at international cultural relations. So on the one hand, those can be very positive and celebratory and initialized by the big UN bodies or something like that, but they are definitely also constituted by a certain repeated and historical exclusions that don't find their way to the stage of something that deals with international cultural relations. So I'm aware that this is being recorded, but I'm also trying to say that there is a certain notion of what international cultural relations can mean, or who it is embodied by, and oftentimes that does not include everybody, and the everybody claim is always difficult and maybe impossible. But I think it's important with this panel that we gathered to become aware of the diversity that of bodies and perspectives that are part of international cultural relations. I don't know, that's a
well, it is one of ICRRA's vulnerabilities that you have to have an institution behind you. And what Hex and myself are talking about is we're not included in the institutions, and that is something that you might want to look at, the lived experience as equivalent to formal education and structural support. I just leave it out there, kind of emphasizing, because I think a lot of questions are actually been explored and lived through by marginalized communities, but none of them have the stamp of approval, institutional approval.
And I mean, that's maybe the momentum of allyship too, right? To gather different people with different capacities, whether they're institutional or symbolical privilege or just material privilege, to share space and to host a conversation together, so that these insides and outsides become a bit more blurred.
I mean, the way I would view it is I don't like the word ally because it feels like a magical status. I like the word action, doing something, you know, and I guess we all want to think of ourselves as good people, but I'm not a good person. I know I'm not a good person. I may on occasion, on a rare occasion, do a good action, but thinking of myself for me as a good person is a trap because it's about my feelings and not about the action. And I think focusing and training to do action is very important. And this is, as an artist, you can think about stuff or you can do things, and by doing, you learn what the next step is. So emphasize on doing rather than on the feeling good or, you know, being a certain thing. Doing, and the doing teaches you the next step that you need to do by doing. Does that make sense?
I think so, because if speaking and talking is doing, as we are speaking now, we are trying to engage, I think, in action. Of course, there is more action to be taken after this. But thanks for pointing that out. And I understand that allyship can be a buzzword. At the same time, I think allyship also starts from acting, talking, doing, like we do now. Being mindful of the time, I think there is one last comment and question from Holly from the audience, which is primarily related to Yisha and Jason's comments. I'll just read this out. My thoughts on art being historically dangerous and provocative, and especially a voice for marginalized groups. Western society has been generationally moving away from organized religion. From a far-right perspective, they legitimately feel now that they are being fringe and revolutionary. I find this fascinating because they can see themselves as provocative and dangerous. How do we reconcile this, or even approach the conversation with the alt-right when they themselves feel marginalized? Yeah, that's an intriguing question. Also a big one. I'm looking to Jason and Yisha digitally to see if you may want to respond to this this question or comment of Holly's.
It's a really good question. And it's something I struggle with because I don't want to have these conversations with the alt-right. Like, I think for me, it comes down to making art accessible and making it truly public. And unfortunately, under neoliberalism, it really hasn't been. And I think this is part of the problem, that, you know, art has become associated with elite institutions, with gentrifying neighborhoods, with spatial segregation. And if art becomes a truly public space for dialogue, for debate, for these things to be worked out, these tensions to be worked out, what would that actually look like? It would probably look like more funding, more institutional funding. It would probably look like free museums. It would look like perhaps neighborhoods that weren't displacing people. It would look at public artworks, you know, not becoming associated with gentrification. If art in the public realm is seen to bring people in and bring people together, that's a starting point of a conversation. And I don't think that's been the case. And I think that's perhaps why we've seen art open for this dissident right to come in and fill the gap, as they're now calling themselves the dissident right, not so much the alt-right. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
I would say, fuck fairness. Make sure everybody has food, you know, and I don't need to be fair. I'm an artist. I don't even need to be logical. Logic is very powerful, but it's not the only muscle we have. it's very powerful muscle, but there are other things we also have. And, you know, and this is trying to bring it back to the question, you know, what would you do to protect somebody else? What would you do to protect a whole group of people? And, you know, adhering to a bygone structure may not be the right answer, because a lot of times you try to hold on to what was. But today in our reality is not what was. We can't hold on to it. We have to, you know, face the reality we are in right now. And we all, you know, we can want a reality that is gone, but we have to face the reality we have right now. And it is a fight and it is a war. I know it is a war because people around me are dead. You know, it's, you know, it is how it is, but that's the reality. And I mean, we have to do something. And even if you do the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing will teach you what not to do next time. But it's really important to do, and it's really important not to let the other side dictate the rules of the game, dictate the playing field, parse it differently. It's not a conflict between, you know, trans women and cis women. It isn't. It's a conflict about body autonomy between the far, you know, the far right and the people who just want to be alive. That's how I would parse this question.
Thank you for taking a stance on this. There is 2 minutes left in the panel, but I would say we can somewhat generously go over time a little bit, because there is one question from Odila, who is a founding member of the ICRRA network, who also wants to address a question to you, Yisha, and I think that interconnects a bit with what you said about the past and the current moment. So there was a question about, or the plea to speak a bit more about the concept of connected trauma and the ability to perceive the trauma of others. So maybe you would like to end on this, explaining a little bit how the pain and trauma of previous generations has affected your contemporary practice.
And this also ties into what is called positionality.
Exactly.
But I would say it in a maybe in a different way first. The concept, like the diamond net of Indra. It's a net that every intersection of lines has a diamond, and in the face of that diamond, you see all the rest of the net by looking at this one thing. And trauma is a huge thing. It you know, it has a personal and a social effect. It's literally an experience that tears away you from society and you from your concept of reality. It's something so devastating that it creates a tear, and it makes memory not fluid. And in that, you know, there is a way of both connecting with yourself. In work, if you had the trauma, it's both a way of connecting with yourself, but also it creates a sensitivity to being. And when you connect with yourself, you're able to see others better, because we are not separate. You know, we are not the same, but we are not separate. And by, you know, looking inwards, you can see outwards. And by continually polishing the mirror inside you, the world is reflected. I hope it's not coming from a theoretical perspective, and I find words to be very limiting. That's why I make things. But you know, there is no exact formula, but it is following the same pattern. And you have to really look in, you know, and with trauma, a lot of times you can't even remember it. You can't see it. You can only see its effect on you and around you. By going into that, when you're strong enough and safe enough, you can see suddenly, when you start working with, you can see also outside you things that are not inside you, because what's inside you was holding you from seeing outside, because you kept only seeing the same things that are holding you back inside. Sorry, that's like, you know, 20 years of artistic practice in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I understand the dilemma of, you know, trying to connect across the screens and with people's super interesting questions and comments. Thank you for putting this in your own words, Yisha. I think we're at a point where I shall formally close the panel. We're at 11:30. This concludes our session. Thank you for so much for sharing your perspectives, sharing your work, your research, your thoughts, your personal stories, the space with us together. We have recorded this panel, so there will be chances to rewatch or watch afterwards on YouTube. I am happy to also point you to the last panel that's taking place this afternoon at 2 p.m. Berlin time zone, and calculating to your own maybe later or earlier in the day. In the afternoon, we will talk about cultural democracy, digitality, and cooperation, nurturing intergenerational dialogue for sustainable progress in fluid world orders. And this panel will be chaired by our ICRRA member, Shadrach. Thank you very much for listening this morning, this afternoon, tonight. I am aware that there are many more things to be talked about, and I sincerely hope that we'll find other places and times to talk about this. Having spoken of allyship or action, the doings, the words, maybe this is just the first of such actions to be taken. And yeah, on behalf of the ICRRA network, thank you very much for being with us this morning and hearing different types of perspectives on what artists do in times of authoritarianisms on the rise, but also in times, that stay conflicted in and about culture. Okay, there is lots of things happening on my screen. I will just leave it at that. Thanks, Hex, Yesha, Jason, and Wojka for these super interesting inputs. And I see Pedro is eagerly spreading some more information about the network. Check that all out. Other than that, I wish you all a good weekend, get some rest, and thanks for being with us this morning. Bye on my side.